Right, so that's good to see. We got time. Yeah, good. Okay. So what I what I put together today, I've had some interest come in about exactly what this sort of model is that I'm doing. This is the sort of model slash language that I'm talking about, and that we're sort of going through, and we haven't really gone through it. You and I haven't really gone through it. We've sort of touched on it and sort of talked about different aspects of it. But I thought, well, now that I've finished teaching for the trimester, I've got a couple of weeks off. I can actually, I've got a bit of time to put together some slides, and we can go through and have a bit of a chat about it. So, planning to put together a just sort of a just me going through it. But I thought it'd be really good to have a chat as well with you, so you can throw back, and we've had a bit of experience with it, so you can throw back any questions that I might take for granted, but other people may find, completely obtuse. It's always a possibility. So let's do. I don't know how long this is going to take, but I think it's probably good to get this overall view of what we're actually trying to do. So there is this model that I've created. I've been doing a PhD for a long time, so it's taken me years to sort of put this together. It might seem fairly simple from the top, but it's actually quite complicated. Or the process of creating has been quite complicated. So I'll make a start, and Fraser, if you've got questions and stuff, if anything doesn't make sense, what I'm actually going to ask you to do is to is to certainly ask any of those questions that come up.
Okay.
Because assume, if anyone else is watching this, they're not going to know either. In fact, they'll probably know even less than you. So if you don't understand something, then guaranteed, they're not going to understand it either. So I've called this Game Design 101, just for lack of a better name. This is the sort of first thing that we're going to do. And there's going to be more of these as we go into more depth, because we start at the highest level and we sort of then go down to the detail level. So, as we know, game designers are designing player experiences. That's essentially the approach that I'm taking. There's a lot of discussion about this in the sort of game design area, but essentially, if we consider we're designing player experiences, we're sort of coming from the same level. So this is the diagram. We've got our player on the left-hand side. The player interacts with the game and then has some sort of player experience. So hopefully this is kind of very straightforward, and it's pretty self-explanatory. So what we're interested in is what the experience is that the player is having when they are playing our game. This is from a design point of view. So the issue, or the problem, is that the game development team, who we're working with, is actually developing a pretty large and complex piece of software, Fraser, as you just demonstrated. I know you're doing both the design and development, but you can kind of see that there is quite a lot of work on the software side, and that involves code. It can be C++, C#, blueprints, depending what game engine you're using. You've also got story in there as well. So there's narrative, there's dialogue, there's characters, there's all sorts of stuff. And of course we have art assets as well, which art assets, we include both visual and auditory art assets in that heading there. So, both the visual style and sound and music in those as well. So I've got all that, and what the question is, the game development team needs something at this kind of level of detail to use if they're going to be actually able to develop the vision that you have, the sort of creative vision that you might be working as a solo designer, or you might have a small team of designers. So once you've done your design, once you've done your your pre-production, what are you going to give your development team so that they can actually create the game that you have the vision for? So this is Confluence. It's a type of wiki done by Atlassian, so you might be familiar with this sort of thing. Left-hand side, we've got this sort of hierarchical list of different things up here, and then we've got other things down here: avatar, game world, game characters, etc., etc. And we've got information down here. We've got the game details, genre, theme, etc., etc. So the question is, how do we get from this very, very high level? As a designer, you've got this creative vision, and that's fantastic. Creative vision, that's exactly what we want. If you don't have a creative vision, how are you going to create? How are you going to create it? But how do you go from this point, this highest point, to having something like this that you can give your development team, where it's very, very explicit in many ways as to what you're wanting, what you're expecting. So the question, how do we get from that subjective qualities of player experience to what we need is a very detailed description suitable for the development team? And that's, I guess, the question that we are looking, or that I'm looking to answer. So you can seamlessly go through from that high level right down to a level where programmers can get the information they need to create the sort of player experience. So really, first place we start is at top level. So the relationship between the player and the game. Maybe I should pause there, Fraser. Do you have any questions as yet?
I think it's all making sense. It's no, I think you kind of I have questions, but you've addressed them as questions. So I'm like,
okay.
I understand that you will get there.
Okay, cool. So the first thing we're going to look at today is the top level, the relationship between the player and the game. And a lot of this is where we've been at, what we've been doing over the last, goodness me, it's what been, I think this is the fourth stream we've had on this. So
yeah,
something like that. Maybe. Fourth, fifth. So this is kind of what we've been focusing on. And we haven't got any further yet. So anyway, we're looking at this top level relationship, which is the one you really want to have as clearly defined as possible. So if we come down here, we've got, again, the player and the game. And first up, we kind of split these into two different types of relationships. And it's interesting, we talk about relationships, and that's kind of, I think that word relationship is probably indicative of the type of mindset we need to have when it comes to designing these games. So we're not talking about code, we're not talking about technology, we're talking about relationships. And relationships are to do with psychology, they're to do with sociology. They're sort of touchy-feely kind of things. We're not talking about hard and fast types of things. We're talking about relationships. We're talking about human psyche, human emotions and stuff. We've got two specific relationships there. First is the personal relationship. And then there's the functional relationship. And of course we have the player experience. So the player experience sort of comes out of these relationships that they have. So first up, the functional relationship is pretty simple. It's essentially the input-output between the player and the game. So, an input can be just a mouse and keyboard. Output can be display and speakers if you're on a PC, for instance. If you're on another device, it's like a console. So the input might be the controller, the output might be the display and speakers. Now the functional relationship can potentially sort of go a little bit deeper. So when we're talking also about the mechanics, in fact, Fraser, we're just looking at what you're doing with the car. Some of that stuff you might also put under functional relationship because, for instance, if there's, timing and things that you've got coded into your input. So if the player has to hit a certain key at a particular time, then that sort of code also would really come under the functional relationship as well. Anything that's sort of purely I/O related comes under that sort of functional relationship. And I don't think this is very complicated. I think we understand a lot about functional relationships. When it comes to games, we understand how the hardware works. The I/O, all that stuff has been dealt with for many, many years. We're not This is not a mystery. This stuff's not a mystery to us at all. So it's mostly the input output, but it can also be partly part of the code as well. Now, when it comes to the personal relationships, though, and I have through the work we've been doing together, Fraser, I've actually refined this a little bit. You'll see. So, personal relationships. Number 1 is emotion. Number 2, I've got there is mind, mental state. Number 3 is meaningfulness, and number 4 is social interaction. And we have talked about those. So, emotion is the way that the player is feeling. And we've talked about a couple of different models we've looked at there. So there's the PAD model, pleasure, arousal, and dominance model, which I really like. I think that's a really interesting model. There's been some work done on how that connects with the mental state. So there's been some research done on sort of how the PAD model connects with the flow state, for instance, and how to get people into a flow state using that sort of stuff. And this sort of research tends to be done using like ECG monitors and things like that. So the mind mental state, I'm not sure whether we can combine those together, but I think it's kind of easier keeping emotion and the mental state separately, because it's kind of easy to differentiate those two. So the next one is meaningfulness. That's particularly around stories, the most obvious things, and the narrative part. Can also be more, particularly maybe if you have some sort of maybe educational games. So the meaningfulness aspect if you're doing, say, educational games, or if you're trying to convey something more in your games, then you can sort of mean those things. Can be more explicit for an educational game, for instance, or more implicit for something a little bit more subtle. And the final one, social interaction, is about interacting with other people. So that's specifically for multiplayer games, which you're not doing a multiplayer game, so it doesn't really relate. But if you're doing a multiplayer game, that would be part of that. So yeah, go for it.
I'm just thinking about those personal relationship aspects.
These ones here,
yeah,
yep.
And are these two-way in your sort of understanding of these? Like,
no.
No. Oh, okay.
No. So this is that's a fair question. Although how would it be two-way? Maybe what's your?
I guess if I think about the functional relationship,
Mm-hmm.
the player gives the inputs and the software gives the outputs. So that's sort of that back and forth.
Yeah.
And in here, I was thinking about it, and I'm like, I guess the main thing I see is it's like you could have the individuals, the player's emotional response to it, and then I guess there's like an intended emotional response that the game is trying to output.
Well, of course.
I feel like
yes,
it's a little more obscure in that one, but I think about things like the meaningfulness, where it's like, and I guess that's that classic sort of discussion and argument about sort of like the death of the author, right? Where it's like you might make the game with an intended meaning behind it, but players might take it and get a different meaningfulness.
Of course.
So,
of course.
Yeah, it's like, do we prioritize either of those over the other in this sort of model?
Well, of course, this is about game design. So at the end of the day, whatever we're talking about here is, as designers, if we're designing a game, is our intention, is what we want to put into the game. What the player takes out of it, that, as I think as what you rightly said there, that is up to the player. It's up to the situation the player is in at the time. It's up to the player's sort of emotional, mental state. If they're sort of going through, a situation of grief, they might have a very different experience than if they're going through a situation of, joy and elation. So we can't control that. Yeah. But absolutely, that is correct.
I guess we could measure sort of our effectiveness of communicating these things by the player's response. If they're if they're feeling the emotions we wanted them to feel, or they're understanding the meaning that we wanted to put in, then
I would never say that you failed because a player has a different experience than the one you intended. I mean, I think if the player has a compelling experience, regardless of what that is, then you've probably succeeded. Yeah. I would never say that there's a... Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether you were necessarily saying that, but I think there's a kind of an implicit idea that if the player doesn't feel what you're intending, then that's a failure. But I think it's only a failure if the player walks away from your game and never comes back and doesn't want to play it anymore.
Sure.
That's
I think
the failure.
I may be seeing it sort of on the flip side, where it's like, if we are putting energy and resources and we make assumptions, or we test. Well, that's it, right? We test to see if the things we are designing are creating the response that we're looking for.
Yeah. For our target audience. Don't forget target audience and all this sort of stuff as well. Because of course, if you test a kid's game on an adult, you might find that doesn't work. So you have to keep in mind target audience, and I guess you'd say it's for most of your target audience should find it compelling in some way. Yeah.
And the other little thing I wanted to touch on before I get back to
no, good.
The social interaction, you explicitly state the multiplayer being the sort of key there.
Yeah.
But do you see it incorporating sort of social interactions outside of the game? I'm thinking specifically when Elden Ring came out, and there was a lot of people talking online, but also face to face. Did you go here yet?
That's the meta. That's the meta stuff. Yeah, that's kind of outside of the model. What I'm focusing on here, I'm not even really interested in the menu system and stuff like that. I'm only interested in what's happening in the game. What you're talking about is obviously it's important, but that's kind of the meta game, and what happens sort of outside. That's kind of more, I guess. You've got your business and marketing side. You've got your community managers. That's kind of more that's what was happening around the game. So that's not. I'm not saying it's not important, but that's not what this model is focusing on. It's focusing on the design of the game specifically.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Anything else?
Nope. Sorry, I just had a big mouthful of tea.
Gotcha.
Got me.
All right. So essentially, a little diagram becomes sort of something like this. This is what we're focusing on. And again, I haven't put the functional relationship in there, mostly because we kind of understand them. Not to say it's not important. And like in your game, it's going to be important. So it probably is something that you would put in there. But the personal relationship is the thing that we're, I think, interested in specifically at this point in time. So we've got that. Now, the thing that I realised I'd forgotten, I came back to over the last couple of weeks, and I was sort of ruminating over this, because we've got the game over here, we've got our relationship, we've got our player, we've got our relationship, we've got our experience, but we're not saying anything about the game at this point. I'm like, why did I leave that out? So this should be here as well. So there should be the game's attributes as well. So genre, theme, art, and story are the sort of high-level headings we've got here, and they kind of expand. So we've got genre includes. Remember, I had time and space sitting there, and I was like, it's there, but it's only there because I put it somewhere else. So time and space really does fit under genre. So time and space is like the size of the world. So a top-down game compared to like a first-person sort of one-on-one type game. Is there, and also time. Sometimes you have was it turn-based combat in that latest Clair Obscura? Was it Clair Obscura? Something like the 33. I can't remember the name of it now. One of the latest games to come out, which is a turn-based combat system. But then also the gameplay. So within that sort of the gameplay, so that sort of fits under the genre there. The theme's a little harder to describe. You may be able to describe the theme better than I can, Fraser. How would you describe the concept of theme when it comes to games?
Yeah, I think it's.
I just throw you throw you with that
That's
one.
a tough one. It's
Uh,
tough because I'm like a lot of my go-to pools for theme. I, I looked up to try and collect my thoughts, and then I looked back at the slide, and I'm like, well, no, I was going to say it's kind of like a collection of genre, art, and story, but there is
well, the
like
theme.
it's
So, well, what about say a game I think we're both familiar with, The Last of Us? What's the theme of that game?
it depends how you interpret it. I mean,
Um,
yeah,
okay, look, maybe we'll go into this. Maybe this is a good one. Maybe we'll spend some time going into this as well. What the theme is. Jesse Shell spends a lot of time talking about theme in his book. Was it Lenses of Gameplay Design? And also theme is a big thing. Theme is a big theme when you're talking about doing things like script writing. So the theme is the essence of the story. It's not the story itself. And the theme is quite often like subtext. It's something that's underneath
yeah,
the surface, but it informs what's going on. Usually involves like change. So there's particular themes that are like really quite popular at particular times.
do you
Um,
know what? What would have been a good response from me when you first asked is giving the examples that Gemma and I came up with for Arvo.
sure.
Because that
What?
was some
Yeah.
stuff we did with our narrative. So, one of our core pillars is found family,
Mm-hmm.
and that ties heavily into community. I mentioned a lot when we were talking about it last, but
Mm-hmm.
we settled on more of that found family sort of thing. So, starting
Mm-hmm.
as a stranger, being accepted into the community, and that sort of general, the family nature of that. Where you gain enough trust and you trust everyone else enough that there's a lot of leeway,
Yeah.
and you sort of stick up for each other. And then
Mm-hmm.
the other one we have is like the straight man, sort of the old comedy trope. So the idea being that the player character is going to be the portal for the player into this world that's full of all these crazy, strange, daft NPCs. So
Mm-hmm.
those are the themes that we're working on. And yeah, when
Yeah.
you put it like that, I'm like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense now. I got it.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So other common things like redemption is a very common theme. So I think if we go back to The Last of Us, if you remember the beginning of The Last of Us was Joel lost his daughter, was
Yeah.
killed, and so that sort of set things up where there was his failure at protecting his daughter, and then you go into his relationship with
Ellie?
Ellie. Ellie, it is Ellie. That was him. Yeah, that's what I would have said. His relationship with Ellie, and basically it's that whole journey of redemption where he has to sort of face what happened. Ellie is a young girl about the same age as his daughter was at the time, and he has to protect her and eventually redeems himself in a way at the end when he
Yeah.
goes and kills everyone in the hospital. I wasn't very comfortable in that scene, to be honest, when I was killing all those people. But
It's interesting how the theme can be warped depending on sort of the player's interpretation. I think The Last of Us is such a good example of that. With The Last of Us 2 being basically a direct exploration of that theme, and then sort of how true it was, and how people can interpret it differently. So yeah, I can see why having this sort of nailed down is important, because it can
yeah,
get
yeah.
really out of control really fast if you're not careful.
If you have a strong theme, it informs many more. You could almost say all your decisions throughout the design process. So if you know what your theme is, then you can always refer back to the theme when you come up with questions, sort of from a design point of view.
Yeah.
So very important. We might go through into theme. I think that might be a really good idea. How you come up with a theme and things like that. So the third one, art. Again, I've sort of put visual design and audio design and music under the art heading there. I think these are the two things that sort of set set the mood, the feeling, etc. And then there's also the story. So these are the game attributes, and of course these sort of story. You're going to start going to story. I mean, you've got the whole hero's journey, the three act structure if you're using things like that. You've got your characters and everything sit under there as well. And of course they're not necessarily separate. So your art is going to be linked very much to your story. So you're going to have art for characters, for different things within the story, and the theme and the story fit together really well. And then your genre. So this is the interesting one. We did a video on this a few weeks ago about that ludo-narrative dissonance. So marrying the genre, the gameplay, with the rest of it, the theme, the art, and the story is part of the challenge. Getting that right. So they are the attributes of the game, if you like. We all good? Questions?
Yeah.
Comments?
When with story, do you consider the mode through which the story is told under that as well? I mean, the classic example being like environmental story versus whether it's dialogue or like From Software style item descriptions.
So that would be really where the art. So the art is the art is telling the story. So
yep.
Yeah. I mean that they're definitely all intertwined. They're not necessarily exactly separate from each other. They
for sure
they interact. They support each other. They should be a kind of a whole. But of course, when you're developing the whole thing, you need to sort of consider each of those independently. Also,
it's like each one is separate, but you can't build one fully without building the others at the same time.
Yeah. Although you might start with a story. I mean, I guess films and TV start with a good script. So, but then again, where do you have to start? You could start with some art, with an art, idea of art style. You might start with a genre. You can start wherever you like, I guess, and you just got to do it well.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe my brain doesn't work the same way. I feel like if I think about theme, art, or story, that I can only think of an idea that is intertwined with the others. Genre is probably the only sort of attribute where I could just pick a genre out of the hat and then start building from there. But I don't know. My brain just they're very intertwined. That might.
Oh no, I think you're correct. No. Well, although you can have a story with different art.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very much so. You might have the same. I think theme and story are definitely connected, very strongly connected. The art, for instance, if you think of the number of times a Shakespearean play has been done in a modern setting using modern props, and I mean that's really taking the art, same story, the same theme, but putting it into a modern setting is kind of essentially changing the art and whatever. So,
I might need to do some sort of mental exercises to start.
Look, it's an interesting area, I think, and there's some interesting questions to ask about that. But anyway, we're not going to answer them now. So, anything else?
No, that's all good. Yeah, cool. I've got it. Locking it in.
So essentially, there's the sort of highest level. Turns out to be sort of, I guess, this sort of diagram here where we've got the game with its attributes. We have the player. We have the personal relationship there, and the player experience, and they all kind of fit together to create that player experience. So this is the highest level. This is sort of what we should be sort of thinking about. So that's the first part. That's the highest level. Then there's the questions and the next level. I'm just wondering how many. We've got a few slides to go. Yeah. Again for time. We've got about another half an hour, 40 minutes to go. So you're happy to keep going through this?
Yeah, I'm happy to push on.
All right. So up until now, we've kind of been through with Arvo. We've talked about the emotion. I think we've talked about the mind and mental state and the meaningfulness to a degree. Am I correct in saying that? And we've gone through as well the genre to have the genre. You've spoken about the theme, art to a degree. And we did talk about story last time, but I think that was one of the ones you said you were going to go away and do some expanding on the story. Did you manage to do
that? We're making some progress. I mean, the themes, getting those down has been really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of plot, I swear we did. Did I highlight that? Was I smart? Yeah, so with the themes down and a lot of your input, we've sort of got like the story in the sense of like the history down,
Mm-hmm.
and we've come up with a sort of plot line that we'd like to follow, which sort of leans into leans heavily into the found family theme. Essentially, you know, the player being somewhat responsible for the NPCs being in the state they're in, and then sort of trying to make it up to them by doing these deliveries.
Are you showing something on the whiteboard at the moment?
This is in my private whiteboard.
Oh, okay. So you don't want to share it with us?
I'm not sure how much I exactly do.
Okay, that's fine.
I just, yeah, maybe in the future once it's more understood. But yeah, generally the general plot is player is responsible, which helps motivate them to do all these delivery tasks to try and make it up to the NPCs.
Mm-hmm.
Only for some sort of climax to occur, which, you know, sort of pits the player against the NPCs, and then it's a question of sort of how far do we want to push that. Sort of determines the ending, right? Like if you push it really far, then that sort of character would be excommunicated from the family and sort of, you know, unable to redeem themselves or be accepted. If you don't push it as far, you can sort of have that redemption moment where they're, you know, have formed a strong enough sort of found family connection to reintroduce them. So
okay,
that's sort of where the story's at.
Okay, cool. All right, so we've kind of covered this so far. This is where we've got to. Yeah, maybe not perfectly, but we've kind of covered pretty much all of this at this point in time.
There's bits in every box, I think.
Yeah. And in fact, we may come back and fill in parts of these things that become more obvious when we go sort of down a little bit deeper. That's kind of what I find is you sort of tend to move into depth and you think, oh, okay, that relates back to the sort of high level things sometimes, and you sort of come back and fill in some of those boxes. So that's all good. So the next question is, we've got this game here, but what is actually in this game thing? So how are we thinking about what is actually in the game itself? So kind of what we've got here. So this is the next level down. We still have our player. We always have our player. And then the game. And you can see within that, we've got some sort of fairly high level sort of headings there as well. So the avatar, I'll talk about that in just a second. Game characters and the game world. So once we've established sort of these things, or at least sort of sketched them out, then we can kind of start coming down and diving into these more specific parts of the game. So the first one, and perhaps you could say the most important, is the player's relationship with the avatar. So for those of you who don't know what an avatar is, and so an avatar is basically a digital character or representation that the player controls within the game world, serves as the player's identity, allows them to interact with the environment, complete objectives, and experience the story from a personal perspective. So also, avatars can be highly customizable, not always, but can be, reflecting the player's choices in things like appearance, abilities, and personality. Any thoughts or questions, Fraser?
I really like the way you've sort of set it out, because I'm immediately thinking of, I've been playing a lot of Watch Dogs recently, and you know that game came out like 2012, I think, and they've got that morality system where if you hit too many civilians with a car, you become, the bad version. If you help people, you become the good version.
Yeah.
So I like the way you sort of describe, it can be very customizable in that sense.
Yep.
And in stark comparison, I think about Yakuza. I
Mm-hmm.
think about Kiryu, who is this, he has this like rock solid, etched in stone set of morals,
Right.
and there's nothing you can do as a player to go against them. You're
Right.
always existing within his sort of
Yeah.
moral outline versus, whether it's Watch Dogs or what was the other one? Infamous, I think, where they have that sort of like compass. Yeah, and so it's interesting to see both of those exist in the same space. But yeah, like
Yeah.
you say, they can be customizable.
That used to be quite common. I think there was a time, maybe in the 2000s, when you sort of heard a lot about moral, the moral impact on your moral choices within a game. I don't think I hear so much about that anymore, because you're talking about older games there as well, aren't you?
Yeah.
So we don't necessarily see so much of that.
Oh, what's the? How have I forgotten? The game series Mass Effect. That's never played it, but I feel like that was a big part of that as well. If I'm not mistaken.
Again,
But yeah.
when the first Mass Effect came out, that's ages ago now.
Yeah.
2011, something like that.
Oh,
So
I
there
think
was.
earlier,
It's interesting. It's interesting. You're sort of seeing these different. What would you call them? Different fashions or different themes that appear in game design. Well, we did talk about this, I think, when we were going through some of the Remedies
2007.
games. We were talking about those. 2007 was it? Wow, even earlier. I
First
thought it
one,
was. Gee, okay. Did we have
But
games
yeah,
back in
seeing those
2007?
trends for sure.
So, yeah, 2000, seems like so long ago now. That's 18 years ago. Jeez,
Yeah.
Louise. Goodness
I won't tell
me.
you how old I was.
You would have been very young. I know.
Correct.
I know. Yeah, I was not quite so young. So, so that's So Avatar. So the first level, or the first thing we're talking about here is the Avatar. The important thing to realize with the Avatar is, given that number one, digital character representing character or representation the player controls in the game world. There's just things like identity is really important, but also allowing them to interact with the environment, complete objectives, experience the story from a personal perspective. Everything the player does in the game, this relationship here, it directly impacts what happens with everything else in here. So the way they move through the world, the agency they have in the world, even down to the perspective that they're seeing the world in, the view frustum and all that sort of stuff. That's all from the Avatar. And again, the way they deal with the game characters, or the way they deal with game characters, same thing. How the Avatar, essentially what's in the Avatar dictates what they can actually do with game characters. Is there friendly fire, for instance? Can you interact with other game characters? Can you tie other game characters up and feed them acid and stuff like that, as you can in games like DayZ, for instance? This is all. Many of the things that we do from a design point of view are dictated at this level by the Avatar and how the Avatar can interact with both of these. So it's a very, very important aspect of the game. It's probably the most important. And it's the way that it mediates all the interactions that the player has with game characters and the game world. So, any other thoughts before we move on?
I was trying to think of an example where that didn't apply, but I couldn't think of a single one. So I think it's good.
We are talking of. It's important to say that I am focused on 3D avatar-based games. So, yeah. So that kind of is with 3D avatar-based games. Where it's not that case. So if you have like RTS games, you don't really have an avatar. God mode type games, Sims games, so SimCity and things like that. You wouldn't have an avatar.
I guess Sims. Yeah, I guess that's stuff. I feel like I mean, I'm not an RTS player, but isn't there typically like you take the position of some sort of commander or like, figure at the top of the chain? Or am I
In
wrong
what type
in
in what
that?
type of game are we talking about?
In like RTS games?
Again, I'm not a big RTS player either, but the ones that I have played, basically, you have like a god's eye view of everything, and you just move everything around. So
Yeah.
there's no specific avatar that you have in those games.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So the games that we're talking about here do have avatars. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. All right. So next one is the game world. Again, the player. You could put the avatar in here because basically the avatar is between those two, but I haven't done that here. But the game world, not surprisingly, refers to the entire virtual environment that surrounds the player's avatar and non-player characters. So this includes landscapes, buildings, objects, weather effects, interactive elements that together create an immersive setting for your gameplay. Also includes, so maybe more less sort of solid things, so visual details, things like lighting, sound, effects, physics, which for your game is obviously going to be an important part of. Believable spaces for players to interact, solving challenges, experiencing the story. So the game world is all of these things. So we need, when it comes to design, we need to remember that, yeah, we are creating landscapes, buildings, objects, etc. But at the same time, we need to keep in mind, visual effects, details, lighting, sound, physics. We're also dealing with all that sort of stuff as well. And it provides the space for the players to interact, solve challenges, and experience the story. So that's the game world. Any comments or thoughts?
Sorry, I had a mild heart attack because I think there was some feedback that came through. I am hoping it was just on my end, but it was very loud.
Oh, really?
Yeah, let me. How do I make sure that didn't happen on stream?
I think all I heard was it sounded like you brushed your microphone.
That was me throwing my headphones off. Yep.
Yeah, that's all I heard.
Oh, clip. Okay. Sorry, bear with me for one moment.
That's all right.
Okay, no, I think we're good.
Something happened in your headphones or something?
I'm not sure. There's been a little bit of popping coming, I think, from your mic,
Shouldn't
through
be.
Discord, but it's not showing up on Twitch. So, fingers crossed.
This
it doesn't
is
happen
my
again, I
mic
guess.
here, and it's got a popping guard on it. So, and also I'm talking here, so there shouldn't be.
Oh no, like a static, like an electric pop. So
Oh,
like
really?
almost like a loose cord or something. But
Yeah.
yeah, I
I'll have to
didn't.
check that.
I was looking back on the clip recording. I didn't hear the loud noise that I heard, or really any of the popping. So I'm like, I don't know. It could be my headphones.
We might need to do I might need to do a technical check through to make sure everything's fine. If there's issues there with some of the technology, hopefully not. But yeah, we all good?
Yeah,
All
yeah,
good?
I think so.
We're all
It
good?
didn't seem to be picked up on stream, so
Okay.
that should be fine.
Okay.
Game world, yeah, it's everything that's not a character, I suppose, in the game.
Pretty much. Yeah, it's not the avatar, not the character.
Yeah, makes sense.
No, cool. And then finally we have game characters. And I mean, obviously you can spend a lot of time on this. Essentially, that's just basically, if you're a single player game, it's just your non-player characters. If it's a multiplayer game, it gets a little bit more complicated, but you've got your other players' avatars in there as well, and your non-player characters. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward. That's pretty much it. That's all I want to cover today.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool.
I guess for me, I'm just having a moment there of reflecting, and it is interesting how I'm sort of seeing this. You mentioned right at the top that the concept essentially is working from the high level and
Mm-hmm.
drilling deeper over time.
Hmm.
And so I feel like that's happened a couple of times. And so just now I'm thinking, yeah, game characters make sense. I'm like, wait, what's the context? And then I looked through the notes. And I'm thinking, oh yeah, right. This is how the player experience is formed. Part of it, so characters, game world, avatar. What does that mean? Going back up to the personal relationship, the functional relationship. Yeah.
Yep. Cool. All right. Oh, there we go. We've solved game design. That's all done. No problem.
It's all good. Nothing
Um,
else needs to be done.
yeah. There are definitely other layers. There's other things that certainly I need to talk about and describe. And yes, there is. Excuse me. There is more to go into. Again, we're trying to get to. Excuse me. This kind of level here. Oh goodness me. Hang on. It's going to be a bit of a coughing fit there. Wonderful. Hopefully none of that came through. But we're trying to get to this sort of point, where we have a very, well set out idea of what each of these are. And you can see we've got here these high levels. So you've got the avatar, game world, game characters. You also got story. And there's other things here as well, which we haven't touched on yet, like the actual player experiences. So, what are they? How do they fit? So we'll be going through some of those also. Yeah. So that's, as I said, that's kind of all we're going to cover today.
Mhm.
But what we're going to be going through, since we've pretty much covered, or we've at least touched on all of this with Arvo, so the next thing is to start going through this sort of thing. So we're going to be talking about the avatar, which I had noticed, this had come into my mind previously, that we haven't really talked about as yet, and I haven't seen any concept art of what Mr. Arvo or Mrs. Arvo is going to look like. Either. So we haven't touched really much of this
Yeah.